Hello everyone, this is recording number 12 for Plato, a class on the Republic. Today, I want to turn to the question, why be just? That question arguably occupies Plato throughout the Republic. It is raised already in Book 1 by Thrasymachus. Thrasymachus is a sophist, and he is one of the most notorious figures in Plato's dialogues. Thrasymachus describes his position in terms of two slogans. The first of these slogans is that justice is the good of another, the good of someone else. So justice is not good for the person who is just, but for someone else. And he also uses another slogan, which says that justice is the good of the stronger. So according to Thrasymachus, those who are stronger are the lawgivers, those who are in power. And he argues that people who are in power give laws that are to their own advantage, not to the advantage of those who are governed. So then, if you are someone who abides by the law and you are among those who are governed, then you are just in the sense of abiding by the law, but it is to their advantage, not to your own advantage. So if this position, in terms of the stronger, the weaker, and so on, reminds you of Nietzsche, that is quite plausible. Nietzsche was aware of these kinds of discussions in Plato. And scholars sometimes discuss these discussions in Plato in terms of amoralism. And they say that Thrasymachus raises the question, why be moral? I didn't put it quite that way because the notion of morality is modern and it is not a good fit for Plato's framework. So within Plato's framework, the question really is, why would I want to be a good person? Is it good for me to be a good person? And then more specifically, is it good for me to be just or to have any of the other virtues? Now, throughout the Republic, there are a number of arguments that aim to show that it in fact is good for me to be a good person, or that justice is good for the person who is just. That starts already in Book 1 with responses to Thrasymachus, and then there's more in Book 2 and prominently in Book 4. But when we get to Book 8, so fairly late in the dialogue, which has in total 10 books, Socrates says that, well, so far, we haven't quite refuted the challenge that Thrasymachus raised. And why is that? Socrates says that we have thought of the unjust person as someone who is unjust in somewhat ordinary ways. And maybe it is no surprise that that isn't so attractive. Maybe if you are unjust in somewhat ordinary ways, maybe then that comes with a loss of a good reputation, or you are in fear of punishment or something like that. So, well, that is not great. But perhaps, Socrates now suggests, there could be a more sophisticated way of being unjust. Maybe someone could attain a kind of perfection at being unjust. And once that is on the table, it looks as if what we really need to look at is this full spectrum from perfect goodness and justice and virtue on the one end of the spectrum to perfect injustice. And what we need to show then, sort of from Plato's point of view, is that this perfect injustice is not good for the person who has it, so that, according to Plato, the argument is going to be, this person, in fact, is miserable. Now, I want to end here, and I will turn to the argument in books 8 and 9 in the next recording. Why is it that this perfectly unjust person, as she is envisaged here in these books, is miserable? Or how should we even think of her? For now, I just want to say that the upshot is that even though it seems in book 1, 2, 4 that we refute Thrasymachus, we need this additional argument that extends over 2 books, books 8 and 9, late in the dialogue. And why is that? And I want to, as it were, formulate 2 options, 2 ways of thinking about that. One way to think about it is that Plato just flags how hard the question is, whether it is good for me to be good. And that maybe the arguments that we have are not perfect. Maybe we just don't have a knockdown argument here because the question is so difficult. Another way to look at it would be to say that, well, even if we have good arguments, and maybe some of the arguments that we already have were sort of good in the context in which they were formulated. Even that, assuming that they were pretty good arguments, it might be the case that there is something like a kind of seductiveness to injustice, and that we are psychologically vulnerable to that seductiveness, so that it's just not enough to talk about it once. We need to talk about it again and again and again from different perspectives to, as it were, steel ourselves against this seductiveness.